Thanks, everyone. My name is Lisa MacLeod, Ontario's Minister of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture Industries. Ontario is proud this year to support Canada's Guest of Honor presence at the Frankfurt Book Fair. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that this land we are on brings with it its rich history, including myriad of stories that have been told over many years and important and creative literature that is emerging today. From where I speak, I'm on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Algonquins. The Ontario government is pleased to announce and to support the Frankfurt Book Fair 2021 initiatives with over $200,000 worth of investments through Ontario Creates strategic support, including professional development, attendance at a trade mission to Germany, support for German translations of Ontario authored books, and more. The focal point of Ontario's digital presence for the Frankfurt Book Fair is the Homegrown series of videos produced by Ontario Creates and Destination Ontario, featuring 5 authors, including 2 who are with us today, Farzana and Waub. You can find these on Ontario Creates YouTube channel, and we will share a clip in a moment. Through the Ontario Creates Book Fund and Export Fund, Ontario supports book publishers with $2.6 million annually to promote authors and sell their books in Canada and internationally, including books by Farzana and Waub. The Ontario Book Publishing Tax Credit provides a stable incentive to publish book in Ontario and work with Ontario businesses. The authors with us today are excellent examples of literary excellence in Ontario. Farzana Doctor's recent novel, 7, published by Dundren Press, was nominated for the 2020 Trillium Book Award, and among her many accolades was recently named 100 Writers in Canada You Need to Know by CBC Books. Now, Waub I've known for many years, and Waub Bryce's most recent novel, Moon of the Crusted Snow, published by ECW, became a national bestseller and was widely read across the province for the selection of programs like the Burlington Library Selection, the Region of Waterloo One Book, One Community Selection, and Hamilton Reads One Book. Now, before we get to know our authors a little bit better and share some of their insights, we'd like to take a look at a clip from our brand new Homegrown series. I'd like to cue the opportunity here.
Hi, my name is Tal Lam. I'm from Toronto, Ontario.
I am Waubgeshig Rice. I'm from Wissahickon First Nation on Georgian Bay.
I'm Farzana Doctor, and I'm from South Etobicoke.
Je suis Éric Mathieu d'Ottawa, en Ontario.
I'm Andre Alexis, and I'm speaking to you from Toronto, Ontario. There is something about the mess of where I work that is part of my creative process.
I love working with my hands. It's like you're sitting down and doing a craft instead of like the actual work.
That kid is everywhere, isn't it?
It's been really important for me to weave difficult and sometimes really challenging issues into really good stories.
The act of writing is not just typing words onto the screen. The act of writing involves living your life.
La langue est vraiment liée à la culture. Sans le français, je serais incapable de raconter une histoire.
Writing is being inspired by everything in your world.
We are from Ontario.
Nous sommes de l'Ontario.
We are homegrown.
That was incredible. I often say as Minister of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture Industries, Ontario is the world in one province, and we saw that with the diversity there today. As a ministry that looks really at the social and economic development and the cultural fabric of our province, it really makes me proud to be where I'm from, because we really are a place that has been able to excel, even during the pandemic, in many of the creative fields. I often say that we have a pride of people, pride of place, and pride of product. And I think the authors that we just saw from in the Homegrown series really demonstrate all three. They take us from different parts of Ontario. They showcase their own diversity and their strength. And of course, their product is their creative assets. And I must say over the past 18 months, it's been very difficult for many people in Ontario, particularly in our hardest hit sectors, which are from the heritage, sport, tourism, and culture industries. But I remain optimistic that the next great novel will have been written in Ontario. The next great song will have been produced in this province. And the next great film will be taking place somewhere in Ottawa or North Bay or in downtown Toronto. And so I'm really excited to be with Farzana and Waub today because they are true examples of what Ontario has to offer, not only to each other, but around the world. So I want to congratulate both of you on your success. You're both remarkable people. And I think I'll start with you, Farzana. Can you tell the audience and all of your admirers, because I know you have so many, what it means to you to be selected as a delegate as part of Canada's Guest of Honor presence at the Frankfurt Book Fair?
Thank you so much. Yes, it's a huge honor. You know, this is a huge festival, and sometimes it's hard for Canadian authors and Ontario authors to be noticed in other countries, and to be selected for this it just feels so wonderful, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity.
Well, I'm really glad that that you accepted the opportunity and that we've got a chance to meet and to get a little bit of an opportunity to get to know each other. Now, I've known Waub for a number of years, actually, when he was living in Ottawa. I mean, he is a Leafs fan. I'll forgive him for that. But you're also a dad, and I know your wife and you just had another child in the last year, I believe, and you're really busy. So how do you balance, and I want to congratulate you, and I want you to tell me what it means to have been selected, but above all, doing like the homeschooling and looking after children when we've been in sort of lockdown. Like how has that impacted you? And I know you'd probably like to be in Germany right now, but how do you like to be virtually there?
Well, thank you, Minister, for inviting me and Farzana here today. It's a huge honor for me to be selected to the Frankfurt Book Fair, as Farzana mentioned too. I don't think I could have imagined having my name attached to something of that magnitude when I was, dreaming of becoming an author when I was much younger. So to have, my book be discussed there, to be showcased, and to be supported by the community here in taking me there has been just one of my dreams come true. So it's really, really cool. I have a personal connection to Germany as well. I was an exchange student there when I was a teenager. I spent a year when I was 17 there. So I was hoping to go back. I think as we all were, as most of us Canadian delegates were. But what's happened instead has been really wonderful. There have been many resources put into our presence there virtually, nonetheless. And I think, it's not the same as being there, but we are able to express ourselves, to share experiences and our truths to a wider international audience from here in Ontario and from some of the smaller pockets of Ontario as well, too. To answer your question about writing during the pandemic, yeah, it has been a challenge for sure. Fortunately, our second son was born in June of 2020, just a couple months after the pandemic was declared. So that was a very bright light during this very confusing time. And as such, my wife was able to go on parental leave for most of the pandemic up until just last month. So we had some very intense but very heartwarming times at home as a family of four with our older son as well. And it was difficult when school shut down for him. We did have to adjust, but at the same time, this has been a truly memorable era for us because, our family expanded and, we're looking to the future as this pandemic winds down. So we'll never forget it, that's for sure.
I mean, it's incredible. And I guess I'll ask you, Farzana, because I want to go into the next sort of leading from that, the difficulty in the pandemic and where we live. And of course, this is a global pandemic. We're dealing with this worldwide. Now, you are an author of 4 novels. I want to read them so everyone knows what they are. So Stealing Nazreen, 6 Meters of Pavement, all inclusive. That sounds actually very fun. And 7. You've also got a book of poetry that you'll be releasing this spring in 2022 called You Still Look the Same. So I guess the question that I would have, and I'll ask you this as well, Waub, and some of the cool work that you're doing with We Speak Out, a group working to ban female genital cutting, I think which is congratulations for that. But I want to know where you live and how you grew up and the family network and friendship network that you have inspired your work. And, you know, I expect two different stories because we've got sort of one urbanite here and one more not so much rural because you're in Sudbury. It's kind of a big metropolis, but Toronto is sort of the cultural center of the country. And so I think we're probably going to hear a couple different perspectives, but I'd really like to hear from you, Farzana, on how that's really inspired the work, your 4 novels and your book of poetry and the work that you're doing.
Well, you know, I grew up in small town Ontario. Back then, I grew up in Whitby, Ontario, and back then it was called a small town. Behind our house were farmers' fields. And, you know, one of the things that I really want to, you know, credit Whitby with is its library system. As a little kid, you know, growing up in this town, there were very few people of color. And, you know, there were a lot of difficulties in the immigrant experience. But one of the things that I really remember from childhood was spending hours and hours in the Whitby Public Library. My mother would, you know, bring me there. I think she sometimes just dropped me off. And, you know, I would spend hours sitting on the beanbag chairs and going through the stacks. And I think that's what made me a reader. And in order to be a good writer, you have to be a reader. And so that, I think, was my first inspiration. And then, you know, as an adult, I moved to Toronto. And for many years, I lived in a neighborhood that is one of the little Portugals in Toronto. And that very much inspired, you know, probably 3 of my books, because that's where I was sitting as I was writing. And in a very direct way, it inspired my second novel, which takes place there. And often I write about themes of, you know, diverse communities coming together and making community. And I think that's something I've experienced when living in Toronto.
That's incredible. You know, I never would have thought Whitby being a small town anymore. It's so explosive. It's like where I live here in Nepean in the nation's capital. It's explosive growth. And of course, I'm going to go to you now, Wab, because you did have some time. You lived in Ottawa. That's how we got to know each other years ago. You were a CBC reporter. You are Indigenous, and you have been very proud to share and showcase your writings through many different facets, whether that's through the medium broadcast or through your own writing. And I note also that our agency, Ontario Creates, as well as Ontario Arts Council, have supported both of you. And just wondering, Wab, in terms of that, you know, where you've lived throughout your career, how has that inspired you? Maybe tell the folks at home, you know, where you've lived. I mean, we know you're in the north now, but you were in Ottawa before. And how has that sort of shaped, and how has the work experience to where you previously worked shaped what you do?
Oh yeah, that all has shaped my career as an author, and it continues to influence and inspire me. I grew up in Wasauksing First Nation, which is on Georgian Bay near Parry Sound, Ontario. And I grew up at a time in the 1980s and 90s when my community was really working hard to reconnect with its Anishinaabe heritage and reclaim some of the customs that were taken from us as a result of colonization, forced assimilation, essentially genocide at the hands of the ruling orders, right? So I fortunately grew up in this time of healing, and a big part of that was storytelling. You know, as a kid, I spent a lot of time with my elders, family members, peers, and so on, hearing the stories about our Anishinaabe heritage. And that became part of our school curriculum too, in the reserve school. And I think that really laid an important foundation for me of storytelling. And it's what has really carried me forward. And in that sense too, like the stories that are embedded in the land around us continue to influence me today as well. So I really take great pride and have a lot of respect for the land around us. And I think that's where I go for inspiration, first and foremost, now that I live here in Northern Ontario, essentially, in Sudbury. But working as a journalist, I think has had a profound benefit on my career as a storyteller and as an author. And I worked for CBC in places like Winnipeg, Toronto, Ottawa, where you and I met, and now Sudbury. I've since left CBC to work primarily as an author, but throughout all those years, I met so many people. I heard so many stories. And I think what has really enhanced my storytelling capabilities is just hearing about real life experiences from real life people and understand how humans respond to different sort of situations and how they relate with one another as a result of certain situations, or, you know, the world around them and so on. And I feel just very fortunate that I've been on this path. And I think, this province, which we now call Ontario, where we reside, is just so diverse, as you mentioned. There is a vibrant mix of communities, and within those communities are really beautiful, I guess, collectives of people. And I think I draw inspiration from that every day.
So that's really cool. And I'm just, as you're both responding, and I'm thinking, and, I want to stick to the questions that we've given, but I want to also sort of add a little bit more color commentary to it, because really what you're both talking about is the diversity of Ontario. And it's and here you are both, BIPOC creators and storytellers, and you've learned to tell the stories over time based on your personal experience. Some of it very positive. Others, as Waub's just said, has come from some negative examples that have proven both of your resilience. And so I guess the question that I have for both of you, and I know with We Speak Out, for example, and dealing with female genital mutilation, is a topic that has been discussed and then swept under the rug. It's been discussed. I mean, that to be involved in that means that you have either a personal experience or you have a real strong conviction or passion. Similarly with Waub, you've told many Indigenous stories over the years. I've been fortunate in order to follow them. And so I want to know, you've talked about what inspires you and where you live inspires you, but as BIPOC creators, as storytellers, in the province of Ontario, and I think this is important for the world to understand, that we have a community of writers. And what does it mean to be part of that community of writers as BIPOC creators, and to be able to take your story to the world? And I think it's important that people recognize, Ontario is a very diverse place, and while we don't always, get it right, we're always finding our way, and we're always finding our way together. So maybe I'll ask you, Farzana, to start. Maybe talk about that experience and how you brought it to that community. And again, it's been supported by the Ontario Creates and Ontario Arts Council, which are agencies of the ministry I'm excited to be part of. And then, of course, Waub, maybe you can share that with us as well.
Yeah, one of the things I would say about being part of an Ontario community of creators is that, I think I met Waub at a festival. We later on have been active together in the Writers Union of Canada. So it's all these connections. It's the community. It's the ways that we help each other out. It's the resources like Ontario Creates, like the Arts Councils, that really support our work and help us to grow as artists. And just to come back to We Speak Out, I think that how the personal and political kind of got into my writing there. And just to reference what Waub said about how storytelling is a big part of healing. As someone who has experienced FGC myself and is very active in some of the political change work, it just kind of made sense to be able to bring this into the writing. And it is a very taboo subject. It is swept under the rug. No one wants to talk about it. And so if you can kind of blend it into a story that is pleasurable to read, that is even at times fun to read, you can get into the hearts and minds of people much better. And I think that's really the power of literature, is that we have the opportunity to shift the status quo through building empathy and knowledge about experiences that all of our neighbors are having.
Say, Waub.
Yeah, I would echo exactly that. Growing up in high school in the 1990s, there was pretty much zero diversity in the provincial curriculum when it came to English class, right? Publishing, literature, even mainstream media has long been a white dominated industries. So to come into an industry as, a Black or Indigenous person of color and finding that community and being inspired to speak your experience is very empowering. And that goes back to the relationship I have with Farzana, working on the Equity Task Force for the Writers Union of Canada. We have advocated for other writers like us, and we have been empowered by the writers who came before us, who ensured that we felt encouraged and proud enough to share our stories. Because as Farzana mentioned, it's the human experience. It's the everyday sort of response or reaction to something that you experience as a human that really draws people together. And, you know, it not only helps inspire people from your same community, it bridges gaps between communities as well. And I think that's a real power in publishing. And it's a movement that we're all part of, you know, and we've been supported and empowered to do that, not just by our peers, but also an industry that is now sort of taking note and seeing the value and the validity in stories like ours, and just how it not only inspires younger generations, it also raises awareness and educates other Canadians who may not have learned about those experiences in the education system and so on. So that's where I see the real value in that. And it's just been, for me, in my career as an author, has really empowered me to push forward. And I'm really happy and, you know, honored to have been on this journey with people like Farzana.
Well, you guys are incredible, really inspiring. One of the things I take away when I read a book is that I really like is I feel inspired. I feel I want to be better and I want to do better for other people. And so when you're talking, you guys use, and I'll use your words, this is a movement, the human experience, hearts and minds, empathy, encouraged, knowledge, speak your experience, empowering, advocating, sharing. And so I took note of that because when I read a book or I'm listening to Audible while I'm going out for a walk, the books that keep me coming back and the authors that keep me coming back actually have all that. They've captured my heart and mind. And then when I'm finished reading that book, I feel inspired. And so I guess the question is, you have both inspired me, and I know the people that are watching this from home are also inspired by you. So I'm going to ask you, this is probably going to be the toughest question, because I'm going to ask you now not to talk about your own works, and you can't say each other and point at each other just for this one time. But I want to ask you, is there a book that you would recommend by another Ontario author today that has touched you and made you feel that hearts and mind, made you feel that empowerment, that allowed you to read and understand their truth because they spoke it? So I'll go to you, Waub, and then I'll go to you, Farzana, and then don't just tell me why, no, tell me who, but tell me why as well.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer. And I'm kind of glad we got the heads up before we chatted with you today. Give me enough time to think about it. It's
not like question period in the legislature, okay, Waub?
Exactly, yeah. So, you know, there are so many different storytellers and authors and artists in Ontario who I just adore and who inspire me on a daily basis. I chose to pick a very recent example, a book that I just picked up. It's a poetry collection called Letters in a Bruised Cosmos by Liz Howard. She's an Ontario poet of Anishinaabe heritage as well, from Northern Ontario. I believe she's now based in Toronto. She won the prestigious Griffith Award for poetry a few years ago. Anyway, the reason I chose poetry is because my friend Cherie Demeline, the author of many great titles, including The Marrow Thieves, she said when she's working on a manuscript, she turns to poetry to really inspire her as she's rewriting some passages and so on. So I figured I'd follow her lead and pick up some poetry recently. So it's a profound look at an Indigenous experience. Also, it has some really cool reflections of cosmology, astrology, and just the language she uses is just so inspiring. So when I'm trying to become a better writer with the English language, I turn to poetry now, and Letters in a Bruised Cosmos by Liz Howard is the one I'm turning to now.
Well, I'll have to check out Liz Howard. Now, what about you, Farzana? What do you think? Who have you chosen?
This was really hard. Like, I had a stack of books beside me. I was like, which do I choose? So I decided to choose Thomas King because I've actually read 2 books of his this summer, Sufferance, which I listened to on audiobook, and then Indians on Vacation, which I read in this form. And one of the reasons why I love Thomas King is that he talks about really important issues. He's from Guelph. He's an Indigenous person, and he's speaking about all of the difficult and painful truths, but he's also doing it through humor. And I really aspire to do that. Like, I want people to read my work and be able to laugh while they're also taking in difficult stuff. And so I'm really thankful to Thomas King because this summer I needed a lot of laughs, and both of his books did that for me.
Well, that's great, Farzana. So when you were saying dealing with sensitive topics or heavy information. You like to laugh and have a sense of humor. And Wob was nodding his head in violent agreement with you, which I thought was so great. And so I'm wondering, I mean, the next question I have for you is, what do you hope people take away from reading your books? And so one of the things that you've taken from this book was that, there was humor in the storytelling. So I'll go back to you, Farzana, and then we'll go to you, Wob. But really, like, when you're, I now know what you guys like from Liz and others, but really from your books, what do you hope that me as your reader would take away from that?
I think I really want people to get an understanding of the complexity of the people and the issues. So, within my community, I'm writing a book. This book 7 is about a community that is grappling with this very important gender-based violence issue. But it's also a funny community. It's a community of people who have all different kinds of thoughts and feelings about it. Some of them are really silent on the issue. Some of them are fighters. I want people to understand that our communities are complex. And the other thing that I really hope that will come out of it is that people, after they have this more sophisticated understanding of the community and the issues, that they might take action. They might start to ask, their school board, are you doing any education on this issue? They might ask the government of Canada even, do you have a national action plan on this issue? What are you doing to address this issue? So I hope that people will also move from, understanding, empathy, and then moving towards action.
What about you, Wob?
More along the same lines, I think what I want people to take away from my stories that are about Anishinaabe communities is that these are some of the realities for people living day to day in a First Nation. And I think for too long, Canadians have been denied that authentic experience through the education system and through the mainstream media. I think by and large, Canadians haven't been exposed to just who we are as Indigenous people, what our wants and needs are, what our desires are, how we want to be portrayed as humans. And in some ways, I feel now as primarily a fiction writer that I can get to that context more effectively through fiction than I ever could as a journalist, because in many ways through journalism, you're only just scratching the surface. Thankfully nowadays we're seeing more contextual journalism that gets to some of those deeper issues. And Canadians are learning about, the history of colonialism and, things like the Indian Act and residential schools. And this year is a perfect example, right? With the recent first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation and, the revelations earlier this year of the mass graves at residential school sites. So with that background, I think Canadians are understanding why certain things are the way they are in First Nations. But those are the tragedies that happen, every once in a while. Every day, there are functioning, healthy communities that are just going about their daily business just like any other town or city in Canada, right? So for me, I want people to get that humanity about Indigenous people from my work. And through that, what trickles down is that humor, is that sort of passion, is those nuances of day-to-day life that we know every other community embodies, right? And, I do recognize that this book that I've recently written and the next one are post-apocalyptic sort of dystopian end of the world stories, right? Despite those heavy
sort of like 2020, 2021.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Despite that though, in those times of crisis, you get to know who people really are and how they can come together in response to really negative situations. And that's, I think, a beautiful aspect of humanity as well. So yeah, that's another thing I want to convey in my work.
Yeah, I really like that, the response in terms of how we all respond to what's going on around us, particularly in the last little while. And I've been fortunate as the Minister of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture Industries, all of the hardest hit sectors in the pandemic where people's livelihoods have been, really precarious. And we're now coming out of it. And I had the opportunity this past summer, and you guys are talking about education, you're talking about advocacy, you're talking about everyday realities, you're talking about humanity, and then you both sort of end on humor and passion, which is what I kind of love. And you say it in different ways, but it's been sort of a pattern through our conversation. And so I want to shift gears a little bit because we are talking about the real issues that are serious that sometimes we don't talk about. But I want to talk a little bit about my other hat, which is the Minister of Tourism. And because I feel like it's so interconnected, tourism and culture. And when I think about tourism, I'm not just talking about leisure, going, sitting on a beach, having a Mai Tai and whatever. I'm actually talking about reconnecting within our own backyards and getting to know our own communities. Maybe something we've never done in our own community before, or something we've forgotten we've done. I had this past summer the opportunity to go to Northern Ontario and spend some time on Manitoulin Island. And one of them, I think, something that's still with me is this 3 days I had in Manitoulin and Killarney. And the first couple of days I had the opportunity to visit with the Waubgeshig unceded territory First Nations. And they took me on this lovely tour, and I'm still talking about it to this day, because I got not only to understand more about the Indigenous culture in that community, but also some of the ideas that they have for arts and culture. And then they capped that afternoon off with a visit to a residential school ruins. And of course, as Wab has said, very, very timely. And so that stuck with me. And then the next day I was up to Sudbury and should have called you, Wab. And then I was over to Killarney Mountain Lodge, and I went painting. I'm not a painter. But I actually just let my vulnerability seep in, and I sat there on a rock where I'm sure the group of 7 was, and I painted. And you know what, with a frame, it actually doesn't look as bad as it did, but kind of proud of that. So sort of as the minister responsible for heritage, sport, tourism, and culture industries, I've taken a greater appreciation of the land that we have, whether that's in downtown Toronto on the waterfront, whether that's the nation's capital, looking at the Parliament buildings, or any other place in Ontario. I want to ask you guys the same question, and please take your time in responding to it. And I hope this isn't too off the cuff, because I really want to hear from you. Where would you encourage people from around the world and different parts of Canada, and even our own Ontarians, to go? Not only because it's beautiful and you can get a nice hotel there, but where you can learn something. And where would you recommend they get that full experience of pride of people, pride of place, and pride of product? And I'm going to start with you, Farzana, all the way from Whitby to Toronto. And where would you recommend?
Well, you know, this pandemic has been a time to really appreciate local. You know, there were moments when we weren't even supposed to leave our region, right? And so what was there to do with everything closed? There were a lot of walks, there were hikes, there were the parks around me. And so I got to know Etobicoke. I moved here 3 years ago from more downtown Toronto. And so I didn't have an awareness of just how wild and how beautiful Etobicoke can be. And Wab might laugh at, you know, my examples of wild, but I, you know, went for walks where I turn a corner and I would see a couple of deer, or, you know, we would see foxes and skunks. There's been a lot of skunks for some reason this year. So, you know, I really have appreciated just walking around Etobicoke, not just South Etobicoke where I am, but further north, and checking out the parks and really appreciating the parks. And I did go a little further afield when I was allowed to. So I have a friend who has a house in Sarnia, and I hadn't really thought much about Sarnia before. You know, I had been there just once, just breezing through town on a book tour once. The Sarnia Bookkeeper is like the best bookstore ever. But that's all I knew about Sarnia. And so she let me stay at her place. I was doing a little bit of writing there, but mostly hanging out. And I had such an amazing time. I was like 100 meters away from the beach. And I didn't realize that Sarnia, you know, I should have just looked at a map, but I didn't realize that Sarnia had so many beaches and such swimmable beaches, right? Lake Huron is such a beautiful place to be. So I also just want to be like, what Sarnia?
Well, I'm going to tell you, you're almost going to be hired by Destination Ontario, which is another one of our agencies in this ministry, because that was great. So for people who are not from Ontario, and who may be from other parts of Ontario that don't know. So she's talking about Etobicoke. Farzana lives in Etobicoke, which is where our Premier lives, in Premier Ford. And I have to say, Etobicoke is part of Toronto, which is the largest city in the province of Ontario, and in Canada, and one of the largest in North America, so for our international viewers. And so she's talking about her own community. And I love that you were talking about the trails and everything. And then she's talking about Sarnia. We have the Great Lakes in Ontario, and of course Lake Huron is one of them. And what Farzana is talking about is the Blue Coast. It's got the most remarkable water, and you wouldn't believe it. So you did a really good job. And I must also say Sarnia is like the petroleum capital, I think, of the world as well. My colleague Bob Bailey would say that. So that's great. So keep thinking, because I'm going to go back to this question. Now, Wob, same thing to you. If you had a love letter to Ontario about where you could actually visit and be able to sort of encourage other people to come, whether it's for its natural beauty or for that authentic experience, where would you say? And you don't have to limit it to one place, 2 or 3 if you're really inspired.
Well, I'll just address something Farzana brought up. I wouldn't tease you for, finding the natural sort of elements and corners of Etobicoke, because I think that's wonderful. I'm living in Sudbury right now, pretty close to downtown Sudbury, but in my backyard is the bush, essentially, right? This close to downtown. So bears come through there and everything, regularly. But like in a city like, the GTA, in an area like the GTA, you have, High Park. In Ottawa, there's the Mare Blue Bog. So you don't have to go too far to find these natural wonders in our big urban centers. I would echo some of the locales you brought up, Minister, like Killarney, like Manitoulin Island, obviously. I grew up on Georgian Bay, so that is my favorite place in the whole entire world. I obviously would recommend Wissahickon First Nation, the Parry Sound area, Beausoleil First Nation, everywhere around Georgian Bay, essentially. But you know what? I'll take the opportunity to highlight part of the province that I don't think a whole lot of people get to, especially from the south, and that's in the northwest. Cities like Thunder Bay, Kenora, Dryden. Thunder Bay especially, of course, it's in the news for a lot of reasons, but when you go there, you'll find just a spectacular place with some really wonderful people there. And in every direction is just pristine natural wonders, So yeah, I will give a shout out to Thunder Bay and all my friends up there.
Well, I'm really glad you raised Thunder Bay. Well, you raised everything. Like Parry Sound, I was there this summer. That's where the Bobby Orr museum is, and I was really excited to see that. And hockey is life, as they say in Canada. But I got to tell you, Thunder Bay, I went paddleboarding there this summer. And I fell off the paddleboard 3 times into Lake Superior, but it was fun. And so being in the Great Lakes again, absolutely incredible. Have to give a shout out when you talk about Thunder Bay to my friend Louise Thomas, who owns the Anishinaabe Art Gallery. I go there every single time. I buy scarves, I buy masks. She's got so much, her husband, Roy Thomas, a great Canadian painter. Her son is now doing that as well. And of course, they've got so many Norval Morrisseau works there. It's really incredible. And I'm glad you shouted out to some of the natural beauty that we have in Ontario. I'm going to give you another chance, Farzana, and then you, Wob, because you're thinking now of some other places that you've been. And
yeah.
what might have inspired you to sit down and either write that poetry or do something creative?
Yeah, I've done a lot of my own DIY writing retreats in many of the places that you've described, actually. And years ago, I had a job where I had to travel around the province and do some diversity education. And I had the opportunity to visit so many of those places and to be able to notice the natural beauty. And everywhere I've gone, I've been able to write. And I think sometimes it's just the free space. One of the things that you saw in that little snippet of video is that I often will just go, to natural places. And near me, I'm a 5-minute walk from Lake Ontario. And there's something about just being able to stare out at the vastness, whether it's a forest or the lake, and it clears my mind. And I'll get some kind of an idea. Early in the day, I might have been doing some work, and then I take a break to have a walk with my dog, and then a brand new idea appears. And, that's really exciting how nature can clear your mind and allow you to hear what you need to hear. One other place I could shout out, because again, all of my vacation times have had to be fairly local. I spent a few days on a horse farm in Schaumburg this year. And, I was looking for something that would be like COVID fun, right? I don't know anything about horses. I never get to see horses. And so I got to do that. And Schaumburg is one of those really beautiful towns that's like 50 minutes away from Toronto. Very quaint, very village-like, has some nice galleries, has some nice restaurants, but also the natural beauty around there.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. And you're nodding as well. The nature helps you write, Wob.
Yeah, one place I went to during the pandemic, when I was able to, was the Canadian Ecology Centre, which is near Mattawa, Ontario, on the Mattawa River. So roughly the Ottawa Valley kind of region. And yeah, I had a little cabin there. I spent some time writing, but if I needed to sort of hit the reset button or clear my head, I'd just walk out of the cabin and down towards the Mattawa River there, where there's some rapids. And it's just the ultimate inspiration, as Farzana said. So yeah, that's one place I'd suggest. I did get a chance to go up to the James Bay coast a couple of years ago while I was still working at CBC. So I visited Waubgeshig, Moosonee, and so on, and just wonderful communities up that way as well. And just, again, mighty nature all around, you know, the big river, the vast James Bay lowlands, and so on, you know. So I think, yeah, there's a lot to find inspiration in right across the province.
Yeah, you guys are incredible in terms of tourism advocates right now. So I know they're telling me I've got 5 minutes, but I'm dying to ask this question because, Farzana, you said writing retreat. Now I want to know more about what a writing retreat is. Is that something where you go with other people, you teach them to write, or is it you go yourself and you take your time to retreat and do the writing? And do you do that as well, Wob? Because I think that's incredible, because that's a message to anybody that is a writer around the world that's watching this, to understand that they can be creative and they will be accepted, and that we have the space and ability to welcome them here in this province.
Mm-hmm. Well, a writing retreat can look like any of those things. A lot of what I've done have been the DIY ones, where I just take my computer and my notebook and I get out of my own space and the noise and some of the chores at home and all of that kind of thing, and just go and be by myself and have a little break from the world. I'm going to be teaching virtually with the Banff Center, so it can also look like that. I do some teaching as well. You know, I've never been to a retreat where there have been other writers there and we sort of support each other, but I would love to do that one day myself as well.
Well, maybe that's something we should talk about with my great president and CEO, Karen Thorne-Smith, and my deputy minister, Kevin Finnerty, who are both joining us today. Wob, what about you?
Yeah, it's the same. I think I'm very fortunate in that my wife supports me in getting away for a night or two if I need to, you know, away from the screaming kids. But again, with my laptop and my notepad, just do whatever writing I can in a different kind of location. But yeah, I've done the Banff Center retreat as well, and you know, those are beneficial in that you can, you know, spend some time with some other like-minded creative people and bounce ideas off them and so on. But I think, yeah, most of the heavy lifting happens when you're by yourself and you get to spend some time just in your own head working out your story, you know. So yeah, I make sure that I devote a bit of time to that throughout the entire writing process.
Oh, amazing. So I've got two more questions. This one here is the last one that you knew about. So can you tell me what you guys are working on right now, and we might be able to expect the next book? I know I sort of bigfoot at this earlier with you, Farzana, when I talked about your book of poetry coming out, but what else should we expect?
Well, I can tell you a little bit more about that. So it's called You Still Look the Same, and it's kind of my poetry collection of my 40s. I'm 50 right now. And, you know, it takes up issues of like perimenopause and trauma and losses and healing and online dating and all of that. So it's the most self-disclosing book probably that I've written, which I'm a little bit nervous about. It's my first book of poetry. I've written only novels prior. So that's coming in the spring. And so I'm working on some of the final edits on that. And I also have a YA novel that I am hoping to have sold soon. We'll see if we can get that news out soon.
What about you, Wob?
I'm currently working on the sequel to Moon of the Crusted Snow. It's called Moon of the Turning Leaves. And just a brief synopsis, it picks up about 10 years after the end of the first book. And it involves the community and the main characters traveling south to see what remains of the world that left them behind. And it will be out hopefully a year from now. We're tracking for a fall 2022 release.
Oh, that's amazing.
Is there another pandemic that we should be expecting? Because you predicted a pandemic in Moon of the Crusted Snow. So
I hope getting this story out there closes the door on all that stuff for a long time.
Oh,
Hopefully.
that would be fantastic. Okay, listen, I know I've taken you guys out of your busy schedules. This has been absolutely incredible. You guys are amazing. I am so inspired. I can't wait to follow up with both of you. And so I guess I've got two quick questions, one for each of you. Farzana, when am I getting my tarot cards read by you? Because you are an amateur tarot card reader. My daughter has me sort of interested in this. When and where are we doing this?
Come anytime. We can do it online as well. And remember, I am an amateur, but you know, eight years old amateur.
Well, yeah. I think that's almost professional. So I think that's great. Congratulations. and Waub, you have a, this is going to be a tricky question. You may need to do a political tap dance around this, but who's winning tomorrow night? The Sens or the Leafs? This is hockey country after all.
Well, Austin Matthews is hurt and Mitch Marner apparently may be too. So I will give Ottawa a fighting chance anyway. But if I had to call it, I'll give Toronto a slight edge. We'll call it.
Okay. Well, I should explain this to the folks at home. If you're from, Canada, obviously we're a hockey nation. I happen to be an Ottawa Senators fan. Waub happens to be a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. If you're from anywhere else around the world, this is called the Battle of Ontario. And so it's kicking off tomorrow night with 100% capacity. We'll see who wins. And I got to say, I'm with two massive winners here today. I'm so proud of both of you. I'm glad that Ontario Creates and the Ontario Arts Council have supported you. And I hope to see you both with your bestsellers throughout this. You are tremendous ambassadors for our province. I couldn't be more grateful than to have both of you leading this charge this week at the Frankfurt Book Festival. It's unfortunate that we couldn't travel there together, but I know you're both home, you're both safe, and you're both going to produce great content in the future, and look forward to catching up with both of you after the Senators win. And I mean, we should be asking you, Farzana, what the tarot cards say.
I'll have to do a reading and get back to you. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's perfect. So look, to anybody that's not from Ontario that's watching this, and if you're interested, we are a very creative province. We are very open. We are very diverse. We have a great time, and we've got great people. So thanks to everybody for joining us. And I want to say a special thank you to Ontario Creates, our team with the agency, led by Karen, and of course, Aaron, who has been doing a lot of the background work here today. We couldn't do this without you, and we are open for business, and we are open for books in the province of Ontario. Thank you.
Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you so much.